wondered how, like, if there's any cases in the real society that isn't, where it's a little bit doubt, but I don't know.
One assumption
Mm-hmm.
is that in the community, we talked about, there's knowledge about all the people. That's an assumption. It's not like a stranger. You met someone in the street. No. In order to get your thing, of course, there's no knowledge of what kind of person. But right now, in this, the assumption is that there's some knowledge about the people around. All right? Okay, and thank you very much. I think these statements are all very important. Each one of them can be considered as a light source to shine upon the master. You have some sense of what the master's personality is. Now, if we try to understand Confucius as the central point of uniting all the statements in the Analects, because last time we talked about the Analects as anthology, as statements, but there's very little sense of a coherence, a little sense of development or argumentation. This is what we are familiar with. But I pointed out, if you want to understand a person, especially a Greek person, well, you cannot understand a person by defining what the person is. You cannot understand a person by reading the biography of him. You cannot understand a person by reading all his words and try to capture what his philosophy is. You have to have what I call a personal experience. And we do not have personal experience, but we refer to those statements that are reflections of personal experiences of his first generation disciples. In other words, every statement here is a record of some life encounter between the person and Confucius, or some reflection on Confucius as a person. Therefore, we look at this man from many different angles. The person is changing, the person made mistakes, the person is human, the person, of course, elevated a very high level of self-perfection. There's a statement about the person as a learner. He set his mind upon learning at the age of 15. He stood up. In other words, he became a householder, he became responsible for himself, maybe also his family, at the age of 30. He had no delusions or no doubts, in other words, about his overall approach to life at the age of 40. He knew the mandate of heaven at the age of 50. He knew something more than simply the lived world here and now. At the age of 60, his ears became attuned. In a sense, he became a great listener. He's able to understand the world without prejudging. At 70, he could follow the dictates of his heart without transgressing the boundaries of right, which means anything he wants to do, he will do it, and yet anything he does is basically within the whole idea of being proper. So this is the progression of a man. Some people say it's the shortest spiritual biography of any great leader or any great personality. So that's his self-understanding, but also the understanding of his students in general. Now, we have a fellowship. That fellowship has been going on for a long time. So all the students know, in other words, as a communion, they know all the others. It's not like you suddenly get together like something like a house, but a small group of people in the house, you know each one very well. At the same time, Confucius knows each one very well. So all his responses are responses not only to concrete situations, to the various kinds of personalities that his students express. So in that particular context, there's a dialogical relationship between the two. And there's also a commitment. Everyone is committed to learning, and learning for the sake of the self. And on the surface, it's very much like the fellowship that Jesus actually formulated with the 12 disciples. A major difference is that Jesus, as the Son of God, and is perceived as someone who is so superior that no intelligence of the students will ever be able to understand the inner qualities of the person, because there's certain kind of link between the person and a superior power. Most of the students will misunderstand it. That may very well be true with Confucius. However, Confucius also made it very clear that he's human among other human beings, and he's totally frank. In other words, he is totally open. There's nothing that he tries to hide from his students. And also when he encountered his own son, he asked his son to read the poetry, to read the book of rites, and to perform some of his acts. Even with his student, with his son, he's not giving him any kind of privileged access. In other words, everybody is equal as members of this community. So this community of trust, I use the self-consciousness of the group, not self-consciousness of only individual. And so the personality, even though the personality responds to concrete situations, there's some coherence. The coherence is the person. The person involving the body, the heart, and mind, and even the spirit. So the students try to understand this person as a way of developing themselves. They're not asked to emulate the teacher, because each one is situated in a different place in terms of age differentiation, probably, and in terms of place of birth, in terms of status. Some people work wealthy, some people not. So in this particular context, that Confucius, as a dynamic person, responses to all the questions, even the questions about the same idea, for example, the idea of humanity, the idea of love and benevolence, he gives various answers, fitting to the particular situation and fitting to the question. So this is how some people characterize this ethics as situationalism. But it's not situationalism as being able to respond to all these kind of situations without an inner core. So last time I mentioned the inner core is his appeal to the idea of humanity. And humanity is a virtue that covers all other virtues. If you do not have humanity, courage will become bravery of the kind which may turn out to be aggressive. And ritual or civility may become formalistic, and righteousness may become very harsh. So this value is something that he embodies, and yet he can never embody it fully. So he said, so far as sagehood and humanity are concerned, I'm far from it. So he's a learner in the sense of continue to develop himself. He's made a commitment to the world here and now, so he's more like us. He doesn't give it a kind of transcending vision. And since he's part of the world, and he shares all the concerns, frustrations, agonies, and pleasures as we do. So he's a commoner. But yet the message is to regard the world we live, in terms of the everyday life, as the arena in which the ultimate meaning of life is realized. You search for the meaning of life, and the meaning of life is not somewhere else, not in your career, not in your belief in a transcendent other, and not what your parents or the society instruct that you should do. The meaning of life is, or the ultimate meaning of life is embedded in what you do on a daily basis. In fact, it ought to be realizable. In fact, realized in your ordinary existence. If you're being alert all the time, and you respond to external situations in full awareness what you do. You're not tied to the external things. You become tied to the external things, you're not able to move freely. But your response or your responses are responses to the changing landscape. And keeping in mind the instructions of Confucius as a seasoned learner, and also you're very deeply involved in a continuous dialogue with him. So there's